In this video we're going to show you how to put together your dining shelter for the Blair Atholl Jamborette, sometimes known as the structure or the table, and in the video we'll show you what to do and give you some hints and tips too. When putting together your structure, you want to avoid using synthetic ropes like blue poly prop. These are plasticky and they slip really easily, meaning that your lashings will slip during camp. Instead, you want to use a natural rope like a hemp-based rope like this, and your lashings will survive the camp a lot better. Start by making an A-frame with 2 long pioneering poles and 1 short one. Make sure your A-frame has a large V shape at the top, as this is where your ridgepole will rest. You're going to tie a diagonal lashing here, and you're going to tie 2 square lashings here and here. Make sure you position the crossbeam, the shorter pioneering pole, at a good height, as this is where your benches will rest. We suggest about 50 centimetres from the ground is a good height for this piece. When tying your lashings, use a spare pioneering pole to lift the poles off the ground so you can get good access with your rope. Here's your diagonal lashing. Start it with a timber hitch and then tie the lashing like this. We've included some links to animated instructions for all the lashings in the description of this video. If you're not sure about your lashings, that's a good place to start. Next, it's the square lashings for the bottom of the A-frame. All your lashings need to be tight to hold your structure together, but these are really important as they will hold up the weight of the benches and of you and your patrol as well throughout the camp. A good tip is to make sure your clove hitch is nice and close to the cross pole so there's no slack in the system. And when you're tying your lashings, work in pairs so you can hold the tension in the rope as you pass it to and from each other and when you tighten your thrapping turns. Another good tip is to use a wooden tent peg or a mallet to wrap the end of the rope around so you can really pull the rope tight when you are tightening your lashings too. When you finish each lashing and you're tying it off with a clove hitch, think about where you're going to locate that clove hitch. You may need to get access to tie your lashing a bit tighter during the camp at different times, and if it's trapped under another lashing, that'll be really difficult. So think about where you're going to put it. Once you finish your A-frame, use a piece of rope to measure from the top of your V-shaped notch to below your diagonal lashing. That'll give you a good measure so you can position your tripod lashing. For your tripod, you'll have 2 poles positioned parallel, and in the third pole you'll come in from the other direction because this will get flipped over to tighten your lashing. For your tripod lashing, you start with your clove hitch. You want about 6 weavings in and out before doing your thrapping turns to tighten between each of the poles and then tying off with a clove hitch at the end. Again, there's a link to an animated set of instructions for this and the other lashings in the description of this video. Getting your tripod up and into position can be a little bit dangerous, so make sure you've cleared the area around you, and it's ideal to have at least 4 people lifting it up into place. That way you've got people holding each of the poles, 2 people to be able to walk the pole up and receive it and lift the tripod into position like this. Once your tripod is up and in position, stand roughly where your A-frame will be and look up to the V-shaped notch. If it doesn't look like it's giving you enough room for your ridgepole, you may need to manoeuvre the 2 upright poles from your tripod to give you a better shape of V for your ridgepole. Next, you want to position your other short pioneering pole across your tripod, again about 50 centimeters up from the bottom of the poles, and tie it in position with 2 square lashings. Make sure there's enough of the short pole sticking out at either side for you to rest your bench pioneering poles in position. With your tripod and your A-frame complete, it's now time to put them in position with 2 long pioneering poles that will form your benches. Make sure the long pioneering poles are sticking out beyond the A-frame, about the depth of the metal plate that will form your fireplace. And make sure that the crosspiece on the A-frame is pointing towards your tripod. That'll make sure that no sparks or ash will fall onto it when you're cooking on your fire. At this point, you want to double check your positioning using the tabletop. If you tie them too close together, you won't be able to fit your tabletop in position. So make sure you double check that first. Now tie square lashings onto the bench poles, holding them onto the cross pieces at the A-frame and the tripod. Once those square lashings are secure, the structure should stand on its own. You can now position the poles that are going to hold up your tabletop. These stick out at the other end into the tripod, where you can have a wash-up area, for example. They can't stick out the other end because that's where your fireplace is going to be. Again, you're going to secure these with square lashings. This time you have to lash these poles inside of the A-frame and inside of the tripod to make sure you've got space to sit at the table. Before you lash these in place, make sure you've got a good height for these poles, because this is where your table is going to be throughout the camp. Now it's time for you to put the final pioneering pole into position. This will be the ridge pole, which will rest in the 2 V's at the top of the tripod and the A-frame, and it will hold up your tarpaulin, which will keep you dry during camp on those wet days. It's best for you to work with somebody to position one end of the pole into the V at the top of the tripod first, and then if you're lucky enough to have a scout that's tall enough, you can climb up and position the second one into position. If not, there are other safe methods to get this up into position. Speak to your sub-camp staff to make sure you can position this pole safely. You will then need to lash this pole to the top of the A-frame and the top of the tripod safely. Now, if you're not tall enough to reach to do that lashing, you could lash some pieces of wood up as steps up one of the sides of the tripod and have somebody there to support you and spot you as you're doing that lashing. You're now going to prepare your fireplace at the end of your shelter. First, lay your metal plate directly beneath where your fireplace will be, and you're going to cut out the turf here. It's important that you lay this plate back from the ends of the pioneering poles so that the pit doesn't become a trip hazard when you're working at your fire. You're going to use your spade to dig in around the edges of the plate and then remove the plate so you can dig up the turf from underneath. These pieces of turf will act as insulation between the metal plate at the bottom of your fire and your wooden structure to prevent your structure catching light when you're cooking. And by removing this turf underneath the fire, it means if there's any falling ash whilst you're cooking, it lands directly on soil and not grass. Next, you need to place some slat wood across the 2 beams that are sticking out where your fireplace will be. Tie these securely onto the pioneering poles using some sisal or some twine. The slat wood comes in different sizes and lengths, so you may need to have the ends sawn off and your sub-camp team will be able to help you with this. When the slats are secure, put a piece of polythene over the top of them and then lift each piece of turf onto the polythene, turning it upside down so the grass is face down. Then lift the metal plate on top for your fire. It's important for safety that this plate is as level as possible, so check that, and if not, dig out some extra soil from underneath and place it in between to level it up. Then it's time to arrange some bricks on top of the plate, which will support the grill that you'll cook on. It's important to leave some gaps between your bricks to allow airflow so you can get a nice hot fire when you are cooking. Once you've got them in position, lift the grill onto the top of them and check that it is level. And there you have it, your completed dining shelter. On camp, you'll then work with your neighbouring patrol to tie 2 large tarpaulins together and string them across the top of your dining shelters. And you can finish it off by adding a wash-up area underneath the tripod too. You'll also be given some polythene to cover your tabletop so that it is wipe clean during the camp. And throughout the camp, you'll want to check each of your lashings and tighten any which are loosening off. And we're looking forward to welcoming you to Target Park in Blair Atholl for the next Scottish International Patrol Jamborette.